This is Launching Your Daughter podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here is today's episode. Episode 6. Welcome. This is another episode on Book Corner, and today I'm actually going to talk about Amy Cuddy's book called Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges. Just want to put a quick little disclaimer out there. Everything that I talk about today is either quoted from the book or in my opinion. I believe knowledge is power, and so I do a lot of recommending of books to my clients, and I have clients that tell me books that have impacted their lives that I also then recommend to my clients. I believe that the more we are informed, the better decisions or the more informed decisions that we can make in our life. The reason why I think this book is so powerful is because Amy talks about her accident that she had when she was in college. And then she went on to do a TED Talk, which became very popular. And then she wrote the book called Presence. In this book, there is tons of great research of scientific evidence of how being present is so powerful and how we hold our body impacts our thoughts, our beliefs. It impacts whether we feel confident or not confident. So when Amy starts the book out, she talks about, quote, "My injury led me to study the science of presence, but it was my TED Talk that made me realize just how universal the yearning for it is. Because here's the thing, most people are dealing with stressful challenges every day. People in every corner of the world and in all walks of life are trying to work up the nerve to speak in class, to interview for a job, to audition for a role, to confront a daily hardship, to stand up for what they believe in, or just to find peace being who they are," end quote. She defines presence as to be, quote, "To be present, we have to treat these challenges as moments. Presence is not all or nothing," end quote. She goes on to say, quote, "Presence stems from believing and trusting your story, your feelings, beliefs, values, and abilities," end quote. She gives some traits that talk about, I guess, kind of the elements of presence. And she quotes, "There's another reason we tend to put our faith in people who project passion, confidence, and enthusiasm. These traits can't be easily faked. When we're feeling brave and confident, our vocal pitch and amplitude are significantly more varied, allowing us to sound expressive and relaxed. When we fearfully hold back, activating the sympathetic nervous systems, the flight or flight response, our vocal cord and diaphragms constrict, strangling our genuine enthusiasm," end quote. Throughout the book, Amy talks to various researchers on how to reduce some of the anxiety or the fearful thinking that we have in our mind. She then talks more later in the book about why yoga is important, and I've got some upcoming interviews with folks who are going to talk about yoga and how that can also impact us to be more mindful of our body. The way Amy defines presence is, quote, "Presence, as I mean it throughout these pages, is the state of being attuned to and able to comfortably express our true thoughts, feelings, values, and potential. That's it. It is not a permanent, transcendent mode of being. It comes and goes. It is a moment-to-moment phenomenon," end quote. So if your daughters are going out on job interviews, whether that's right here in high school or they're young adults and they're at the college level, being able to feel confident when you go into job interviews is really important. So some of these steps throughout this book can help them gain some of that confidence level so they can come across more authentic and believable and genuine. Is it a guarantee they're going to get the job? No, but it can definitely help more with their belief about themselves. One thing in the book Amy talks about, she says, quote, "I want to clear up a widespread misunderstanding about presence, the belief that it's reserved for extroverts," end quote. She talked with Susan Cain, who's a Harvard Law School graduate and the author of quiet, the power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking. And she quoted her from Susan's book, by their nature, introverts tend to get passionate about 1, 2, or 3 things in life. And in the service of their passion for an idea, they will go out and build alliances and networks and acquire expertise and do whatever it takes to make it happen. End quote. So Amy, wanted to point that out. This is not just for extroverts, but it's also for introverts as well. Throughout this book, Amy describes and talks about how a person who has secure, high self-esteem, it's an internal process. It's not looking for the external validation from others to say that they are enough. And a confident person believes in themselves and knows their own identity, and they carry, she calls it, tools versus weapons. Quote, a confident person does not need to one-up anybody else. A confident person can be present to others, hear their perspective, and integrate those views in ways that create value for everyone, end quote. So throughout this book, they really break down how our limiting self-beliefs based on our body posture makes a big impact. We hear often today in these days that, you need to be authentic. I myself even use that during sessions with my clients about finding your true authentic self. And Amy talks about here is, believing your own story in chapter 2. And she says, quote, I take a pragmatic view. The authentic self is an experience, a state, not a trait. This transitory phenomenon has been described by psychologist Allison Linton as, another quote, the subjective sense of being one true self, end quote, and as, quote, one's momentary sense of feeling in alignment with one's real self, end quote. Amy goes on to say, I think it is the experience of knowing and feeling that you're being your most sincere and courageous self. It's autonomously and honestly expressing your values through your actions, end quote. There's just so much great information in this book. I'm finding as I'm, recording this podcast that there's a lot of things I'm like, ooh, I've marked that and I've marked that. So I'm going to try and pare down what it is that I'm talking to you about. The next part that she talks about is actually listening. And I do a lot of teaching of clients with my parents and with my kiddos where you just pause and truly listen to the person who is speaking. It's about withholding judgment of what they're saying and putting yourself in their shoes, which is the empathy piece of it. When we are truly present with others, our own anxiety level goes down because we're not trying to anticipate what they're going to say or how we're going to respond back. It also can really help for the person who's doing the speaking, right? Your daughter, for example, if she's got something she's really trying to communicate to you, pausing and listening to what she says helps build that trust between the two of you, helps her feel listened to. We then begin to also really start to acknowledge more of our own personal boundaries, right? Where I start and stop and the other person begins. And that can help see each person as an individual. And as Amy puts in here, it's also we can acquire useful information. When we stop and listen truly and are truly present with others, we may learn something new, which I find is awesome every time because I do learn new things all the time from people. In the next part of the book, she talks about feeling like an imposter. There's been studies years ago back, and I think it was started back in 1978, where a couple researchers had done some surveys and question working women and how they felt like, people thought they were going to find out that they were imposters or they weren't real or that they didn't know what they were doing, even though evidence showed, they had been working hard and they had a lot of evidence stating to the contrary that no, they didn't just get there by luck. It was due to their hard work and getting to know people and everything. They then expanded that out throughout the years, and it showed that the imposter syndrome, it doesn't just affect women, it affects men too, but a lot of times men won't state it out loud due to stereotypes that happen. So if any of you out there feel like sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, people are going to find out I'm a fraud, I don't know what it is, I'm talking about it. Every single one of us has felt that at some point in time. Amy talked about in here, quote, when we feel like imposters, we don't attribute our accomplishments to something internal and constant. such as talent or ability. Instead, we credit something beyond our control, such as luck. Rather than owning our successes, we distance ourselves from them. We deny ourselves the very support we need in order to thrive. End quote. Then through the research, there's a lot of self-defeating behaviors that we do, which we can self-sabotage, set up ourselves, that's like, oh, we're not going to get it. We think we're not going to get it. And then we make it actually happen that we're not going to get whatever it is we're trying to achieve. All that does, and of course, is increase our anxiety level, and then reinforces the thought that, oh my gosh, I'm a fake. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm talking about. So ways to get that back is one, just acknowledging that's your thought, that you're feeling like you're a fake or that you're an imposter. Two, talking to others about it. This other thing we're going to go into next is actually about your personal stance or your body poses and how that can also help decrease the feeling powerless and feeling a little more confident. Amy talks about regarding the stances, the power stances, quote, power affects our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and even physiologically in fundamental ways that directly facilitate or obstruct our presence, our performance, and the very course of our lives. When we feel powerless, we cannot be present. In a way, presence is power, a special kind of power that we confer on ourselves. And she had an interview with Julianne Moore in this book, and it's just a lovely conversation that they had. So that, end quote, sorry about that. There's two different kind of powers. There's social power and personal power. And what I'm going to focus on is what she did too, is more of the personal power. And she describes that as, quote, personal power is characterized by freedom from the dominance of others. It is infinite as opposed to zero sum. It's about access to and control of limitless inner resources, such as our skills and abilities, our deeply held values, our true personalities, our boldest selves. Personal power, not entirely unlike social power, as I'll explain, makes us more open, optimistic, and risk tolerant, and therefore more likely to notice and take advantage of opportunities, end quote. And if you're struggling on what values are, if you go back to episode 1, in my show notes, I have a PDF file that has values as a handout so you can review that. When we feel powerless, it impacts us being present because we can't be present. We're really up in our own heads and thinking about things and trying to anticipate what that future event may or may not be. So we can't be present with others or ourselves. Whereas when we feel powerful, it actually can, as Amy talks about, it can protect us. It can, quote, connect us. It can help us expand our thinking. And it can also help us feel more, she calls it synchronized or harmonized with various elements just in ourselves. I'm going to give another quote here where she, quote, the way you carry yourself is a source of personal power, the kind of power that is the key to presence. It's the key that allows you to unlock yourself, your abilities, your creativity, your courage, and even your generosity. It doesn't give you skills or talents you don't have. It helps you to share the ones you do have. It doesn't make you smarter or better informed. It makes you more resilient and open. It doesn't change who you are. It allows you to be who you are, end quote. Then in the next few pages, she talks about the power poses, and the quote, the powerful poses is where your body is more expansive. So one example that she gives in here, when she had given her presentation, the TED Talk, she ran into a woman who said her and her family, her kiddos, they call it starfish up, where what that means is it's like when you have scored a goal and you stick your arms up in the air and make like a Y, and you've got your feet maybe hip width apart, and so they called that starfish up. Another pose that she's also known for, Amy's known for regarding in the TED Talk, is the Wonder Woman stance. So I actually talk quite often with the young girls that I work with is do your Wonder Woman stance, and if they don't know who she is, we get up and we actually do that during session to help them feel more confident. And you can do this, for a minute or two before you go off to a school presentation or a job interview, or you're just going to have what you think is a difficult experience, instead of saying, okay, it's going to be difficult, do the powerful stance so that you start to gain that confidence and the anxiety level goes down and you go, it's like, hey, it's a new challenge and that's okay. There's 5 different poses that they display in the book. Some of these, you're definitely not going to do during a job interview, but it's, sitting with your shoulders back and your feet somewhat apart, or your arm looped over the back of the chair, or you're standing in front of like a table or a desk and you've got your hands out in front of you. All of those things help you gain that confidence because it's our body that actually can literally shift the way we think. And I'll describe that in just a second. Some of the powerless poses is where you've got your feet crossed over one another when you're standing and your arms are crossed in front of your body. You're leaning forward in the chair and your hands are clasped in between maybe your knees, or you've got one hand on the back of your neck and then the other arm is drooped over and connecting to the elbow, or you're slouching forward at a desk or a table, or your whole body is crossed. And those powerless stances will affect how you actually feel, come across, confidence level, anxiety levels. It'll impact all of that. The discussion about how our body poses actually affect how we feel began with William James Hall, who was born 1842 and died in 1910. And he was known more as William James. He was known she talks about here, quote, a famous American philosopher, and also known as the father of American psychology. And in my graduate program, we talked quite a bit about him. So he talks about how our body stances really do impact how we feel and think. She has a quote in here, quote, believing that our emotions are interpretations of our bodily, visceral experiences, James theorized that we can fake an emotion until we actualize it, that we can sing ourselves to happiness or cry ourselves to despair, end quote. Amy goes on to talk about, which I also find true in my therapy sessions with clients, that many of us humans, we can get stuck in our heads. And then I will tell my clients that, okay, we got your head here in the office today, but let's see if we can bring the rest of your body in as well. And what I mean by that is there's a disconnect between our thinking piece of it and not having an awareness of how we're holding our bodies or how that impacts how we feel about ourselves. So I do a lot of training in becoming more aware of body stances and how people are sitting, both the women, parents, and the kids in my office, how they're sitting on my couch or on the floor. That's also why I will recommend people to do yoga, because that helps the breathing that is taught during yoga. It also, though, helps people become more aware of how they hold their body in the different poses. And Amy talks about that as well in her book. And again, I've got some future podcasts coming out with some yoga instructors and therapists who incorporate that into their practices. Towards the end of the book here, Amy really talks about being mindful of your body posture throughout the day, and some of the things that you can do to, using your phone, things like that, to kind of take a break, to stretch, to shift that up, especially for many of you who work at the computers, or they have a little bit in here about iPhone usage, or even just cell phones in general, and how people are slouched over, their elbows are bent forward, their heads are bent forward as they're texting and doing different things. And all of that impacts how you feel about yourself, how you carry yourself. In the last part of her book, she talks, chapter 10 is called Self-Nudging, and how tiny tweaks lead to big changes. And it's very, very true. The small things that we change in our lives, the small behaviors that we change, doing them consistently over time. The old saying is the neurons that fire together wire together. And so as we create a new pathway in the brain of doing something differently, we gain momentum when we're consistent. And then those minor changes truly do impact long-term behaviors and things that happen in our life. She also talks about here towards the end is fake it till you become it. And what she means by this is, quote, incrementally nudging yourself to become the best version of yourself, being present during challenging moments. It's not about fooling other people to get the things you desire, then having to continue with that charade. It's about fooling yourself just a little bit until you feel more powerful, more present, and it's about keeping up the practice, even if it takes time to get there. end quote. So I hope you found that this book review, that maybe you'll go out and get it at the library, or you can check my resource page there at launchingyourdaughter.com, that many of us have felt, as imposter at some point in time in our life. And we all, even myself, I notice if my body language is bent forward more, or I call it more kind of collapsed, that I can tell my anxiety level will go up if I've got new stressors going on or things I'm feeling overwhelmed in life. That when I sit back or I stand up or I do my Wonder Woman pose, I really do begin to feel more confident in what's going on in my life. And then I can take action to do the next step versus getting stuck with it. So I hope that you know that whatever is going on in your life, that if you starfish up, Wonder Woman, or just make yourself bigger, that you can begin to feel more confident in who you are and be the person you are meant to be, not the person you think other people think you need to be. I also want to remind you that if you're in the state of Indiana and you know your daughter is really struggling with some anxiety or stress, that I offer online virtual counseling as well. So feel free to check that out on my website. Again, you can go to launchingyourdaughter.com. For more information about this book and the show notes, please visit launchingyourdaughter.com, and the show notes will be there. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Launching Your Daughter with Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. For more information or to stay up to date, go to launchingyourdaughter.com. You can sign up for my email list or join my Facebook group. Thank you.